Hey, Deserving listeners, sister wives, let's see what comes out of my face as I watch.
I was miserable.
Last summer was also miserable for me. It was miserable for Robin. It was a hard experience, what happened here. It was hell for Mary.
I spent the entire summer telling her that she was being catfished and she wouldn't listen to me. I told her over a year ago what was going on and she didn't listen to me.
Whoa. So she knew. What? So Mariah is saying that she knew the communications between Mary and the catfisher. So that makes me think that Mary was either passively or actively sharing this information with Mariah. Or Mariah was just looking over her shoulder, but it kind of looks... Or did Mariah see the leaks? I don't know. A lot of things. But at the very least, according to Mariah's story, she's saying that she knew, she observed, and she was telling her mom, you're being catfished, you're being catfished. And Mary wasn't believing her. Now, there's another possibility that Mary agreed and knew, but was trying to protect Mariah and just didn't want to get into it with her or something. But this, if I'm guessing about what actually was happening, this kind of changes things a little bit, right? It sounds longer than I had thought the catfishing was going on, because she says like a year. And then, so the anger or the rejection from Mariah to Mary, I had suspected something along these lines, but not this much. And if it is this much, then yeah, I mean, that would really cause that dilemma of loyalty that I was talking about earlier.
I asked her to talk to you about it, and she said she wouldn't. She never did. She spent the entire summer trying to convince me to like this person that...
Wow. So we're getting a little bit of a timeline of last summer. So is that like a year ago? Wow. What? Wow. I mean, of course, but I guess the problem here is that Mary was exposing, Mariah's a grown woman. I think is she about 20 at this point, I'm guessing. And Mary is exposing her kid, but, she's not a young child. But regardless, I wouldn't have recommended Mary do this, to almost like it's a stepdad, Like, this is the new guy in our life. And trying to... let's rewind this.
Summer telling her that she was being catfished and she wouldn't listen to me. I told her over a year ago what was going on and she didn't listen to me. I asked her to talk to you about it and she said she wouldn't. She never did.
Then there's that bit. I told her to talk to you about it and she wouldn't. Okay.
Did. She spent the entire summer trying to convince me to like this person that I knew was not a good person. Even toward the end of the summer, she would say stuff like, I wish you could just appreciate our relationship.
Wow. So I was wondering about the span of time. Now, it still could be that she was being... she was in all likelihood being abused and manipulated from the very beginning, but from the sound of it, and it would be typical, this would be true, that there would be a love bombing phase, and then there would be a roosters come home to roost phase. Was the chickens come home to roost phase? Where the intimidating, controlling, abusive stalker transitions to intimidation as there's questions from the victim, and the way so all that could be true, and she could have been brainwashed, and she could be trying to convince her daughter to like this person, and but I'm guessing it's really complicated for Mary to kind of sift through all this. But there's another possibility that the entire summer, it was the flirtation phase. And this is bigger than the way Mary talks about it. And maybe that's why Mariah is so upset, which I would understand. That, okay, yeah, you were victimized, maybe from the beginning. But I know, Mariah would say, I know that there were months where you were not being intimidated or controlled or threatened, and you were in love. I don't know if that's the word you'd say, but you really thought that this person was great, and you wanted me to believe that, because it's one thing if she was just flirting online. It's another thing that she's trying to get her own daughter, like arguing with her daughter. Meanwhile, Mariah is like, you're being catfished, and you just think that Mary would say, maybe I am being catfished. But, the naivete, but also just the desperation. And that's always a thing. Catfish victims are typically desperate for love and attention, and so they get it a little bit, and it just feels so good that they just go into denial, and they just can't accept any information that contradicts it, because if they even begin to question it, the whole thing unravels, and then it doesn't exist, and they can't have that. So, that's, I think, what was happening with Mary. But, wow, this doesn't look good for Mary. and if this was leaked and Kody saw it, and anyway, because I've been wondering why Janelle and Christine and Kody, upon learning about the catfishing, seemed so cold about the whole thing. I mean, they had their reaction. We don't know what's happening off camera, but they just seemed like, whoa, what? Interesting. So it sounds like it was more extensive than the way Mary, because the way Mary talks about it, it was, a brief flirtation happening towards her. But I don't even think she would say that. She'd say it was friendship, right? And then he started to communicate, and then it started to turn threatening, like right away. And the impression I had was that it was like 2 weeks of flirting, or 1 week of friendship, 1 week of flirting, and then it became intimidating. But it sounds way different than that. This sounds like months of the flirtation phase.
And I was like,
What did she mean by that?
I don't know.
Mariah probably doesn't understand the nuances of the entire experience. She probably doesn't understand at all, other than somehow or another her mom was struggled with fidelity.
Right. And I'm really curious, and I'm guessing I'll never know, but Kody is there to defend Mary, which I don't know. So on one hand, don't throw Mary under the bus, but it could discount Mariah's experience, to say like, look, she was being controlled and she's being manipulated, she's being victimized, so you got to take it easy on your mom. I think that's a good message to give to Mariah. But I think if I were a little birdie on his shoulder, I would tell him to just, for this phase, validate Mariah, even if you think it's, to some extent, if not a large extent, misplaced, because Mariah was victimized too. So I would listen and be like, wow, that, what happened? How'd that feel? I understand why you're angry and upset. I could imagine that being very frustrating. You're trying to tell your mom, what are you doing? And she's not listening to you. That could feel very disheartening and also insulting to you and your intelligence, and your competence in this area. And she's trying to convince you, that must have been really weird for you. It's like, this is a catfisher, and you're watching your mom try to convince you that he's this awesome person. And meanwhile, she's rejecting my father and everyone else in the family, and she's humiliated. Like, it'd be really hard for Mariah, Then once that's sufficient, then you can, I think, try to influence. But I think he's going to skip that first phase.
I'm not in a place here where I want to pull out the big, dirty, rotten finger of blame, the stinky finger of blame. Mary made mistakes, but she was targeted by an evil person who had a specific agenda in mind. Mary didn't have a specific agenda in mind other than making friends.
Anytime she would bring him up or
Yeah, that is a way of looking at it, and it is the way that Kody, and I think Mary looks at it that way, that the whole thing was one big manipulation. And that is true. And I think that there's another angle to this, and I think Mariah was ground zero for this. And, given, I think, Mariah's savvy, she understands, yeah, the catfisher was being manipulative, but come on. The fact that I was right there telling Mom repeatedly, you're being catfished. You got to draw a boundary. Stop with this. And the fact that she just, something else is going on with Mom. Something's going on with Mary about why she allowed this to happen to some extent, because early on I was telling her and she didn't stop. And it wasn't overtly manipulative. It wasn't overtly threatening or controlling in the beginning. It was a lot of nice in the beginning. And although, she was being stalked and manipulated and victimized, in those early phases, she could have easily backed out, in the initial phase, and she chose not to, and she went for it because she wanted to do it. She was involved in the beginning, and she was trying to get me to go with her, and I fought, so I think all that is true.
I didn't like her the entire summer, but it would just get worse when she would be on the phone with him or like.
So she was on the phone all the time. I have a hard time being mad at her myself, because our relationship was so bad that we weren't spending time together. She was lonely. She was alone. I mean, all she was doing was making friends. You're right, she was being catfished, but that's all that happened.
That's what she says.
You really think more than?
Yeah, I think that, I think this is a really great conversation overall, because there's a lot of different directions that both of them, particularly Kody, could be going. And he's not overpowering. I think, like I said, it would be good to just listen to Mariah, because Mariah was victimized too. In a way, you could say Mariah was, probably not harmed as much as Mary, but Mariah had no power. Mary had power in the beginning, I think, especially with Mariah there to support her and say, Mom. And so Mariah was completely powerless and experienced the harm, and also that loyalty problem. She couldn't tell anyone, and so Mariah had to sit there and keep this massive secret. She's indicating, I think, that, look, if you were there or you saw the full story, you would not be saying this. You wouldn't be saying that she's an innocent victim. Yeah, she was victimized, and that's not her fault, but there was a phase. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. So one of my favorite songs of all time is by Elvis Costello, and the song is called Every Day I Write the Book. Now, it's a love song, but you can also think about it as a song about our existence. Every day we write the book of our lives. Along these lines, now that it's a new year, you can think about how you want to write your book in 2025. And of course, therapy is a great place that you can explore this sort of thing. In therapy, we can really focus on ourselves and our story. And a great place to find a therapist is at BetterHelp. If you're thinking of starting therapy, it's definitely worth giving a try. BetterHelp is fully online, making therapy both affordable and convenient. They have over 30,000 therapists with a wide range of specialties, and it's easy to switch therapists at any time. So write your story with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/Kirk today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/Kirk.
Happened, then, hey,
I don't believe her.
She never met this person.
I know. Well,
then what do you think, what more could happen?
I think she felt more than she's letting on.
Felt more. She was lonely.
Yeah, I know. But I don't think that's an excuse.
Yeah. And it isn't. It isn't, just because let's say your partner is lonely, that's not an excuse to cheat. It's just not. It's not an excuse to lie. Generally speaking, case by case, generally speaking, it's not okay. And that's true. I agree with that. I'm not going to moralize about it, but, generally speaking, we uphold the moral or the human behavioral guideline of not lying and deceiving, Mary could have divorced. It would be really hard. I don't know if it's spiritually or religiously possible, but it's legally possible. And she could have done that, but she didn't. She chose to obscure and drag her daughter into it. I guess the other thing was the catfishing before she moved out of the house. I think it was after anyway. Yeah, I think Mariah has probably the most rational narrative because she was ground zero observing. The way that Mary even talks about the whole thing, or just the way that Mary talks in general, I think is not very forthcoming. And, she's entitled to that. She doesn't have to in life or on the TV show. But Mariah's always been pretty out there in terms of her communication. I just remember when they pranked her that one time that their brother had gotten drunk or something, and her face, I just remember wow, Mariah is just a very expressive, what is going on in her head. And so I think she's forthcoming. And I guess this also really explains the conversation between Mariah and her mom that one time, where the mom was just Mary was not really communicating. Mary was just so are you angry at me? And Mariah's look, I'm still working on this. Because I think Mariah knew that if she got into it, Mary would argue with her. So, yeah, it's interesting. Yeah. And, I don't blame Mary for it's normal. And I think Mariah sees it that way too. That, okay, yeah, she was lonely and she was receptive and either unconsciously or semi-consciously looking to connect romantically, kind of. And it was a slippery slope for her. It's understandable. It's human. It doesn't make it okay. And it also doesn't mean that the whole story, the whole narrative is that she was being victimized. There was a period of time where if we had just cut it off at a certain point, it was found out or the person broke up with Mary, there was a zone there pre threats and intimidation where it was just straight up cheating that my mom was doing. And I was trying to convince, and she was trying to convince me that even if the other person wasn't a catfisher, I would not be okay with this because it's clandestine, it's secret, it's lying, and it's not okay. So I think that's where Mariah's coming from.
I'm just trying to calm her down from this black and white world, because it's really just heavy with finger pointing. All we do here is alienate Mary by saying these things. And what we really want to do is bring her back into the family.
Yeah, it's hard. I agree with that as well. It's just hard. It's hard to know what to do. I think for Kody, of all the available positions and approaches that he would have, I think this is a good one. And I think it is what Mary would want.
Safely. So you're saying she's not coming clean. So what do you think was really going on?
I think she had feelings for this person.
Well, she's admitted to having feelings for this person.
Not to me.
Well, she admitted to us.
She has told me very frankly that it was just a friendship. Multiple times. And
Okay, that's interesting. So Mariah is saying that Mary has, retconned the whole thing. It was always a friendship. And Mariah's no, it wasn't. That was not just a friendship. You're lying to me about this. Now, I think what Mary is doing is she feels bad or is returning to a policy of just not dragging Mariah into all the details, even though she did originally, it sounds like. And she's just saying, I don't want to rehash this whole thing for a lot of reasons, but also I just don't want to drag my daughter into the chaos. And so I'm not gonna talk about everything that happened because she doesn't need to know all those things. And I think that's maybe what what Mary's behavior is. And I think also Mariah hasn't said this, or maybe she has. So I'd be really curious as to what was going on. How often was Mariah and Mary fighting about this? It sounds like it was frequent, because it also sounds like Mary was on the phone with the catfisher all the time, right? And you just imagine that Mariah, since it's just the two of them, that Mariah would be witnessing it and at least feeling or commenting on it frequently.
Things, or that she believes she could have feelings for one person. You can love more than one person. I honestly get that. And even if flirting and even if deep feelings, it was all just infatuation, Mariah. It wasn't some kind of love, and Mom was never going to leave me.
It's interesting. That's more specific from Kody. Yeah. I was wondering about this because I've been wondering why Kody isn't more reactive. I've been wondering if he even really cares, but I also wondered if, well, with polygamy, it's not unknown to them that you can love more than one person and not have it threaten one of your relationships. And of course, the paternalistic, and they've been asked this question before, he's been asked this question before, like, well, what if one of your wives had another husband, or what if a woman had several husbands? How would you feel about that? They didn't like that. It wasn't something that they were up for, or they saw it was a very much of a double standard. But he seems to be saying now that, look, yeah, she had feelings, but that doesn't mean that she was not still connected to me. You could have feelings that could go a lot of different directions, and it wasn't deep. It was infatuation. And that happens sometimes, which is something that in the polyamorous, this isn't polyamorous, of course, but in the polyamorous community, they talk about that a lot, new relationship energy. It's very understood because it does affect things, right? That when you have a new member of the polycule and there's new relationship energy, the people with the new relationship energy might really be distancing themselves from everyone else, and without conceptualizing it can be very hurtful. And when in reality, or what's best for everyone, is that if they just temporarily adjust for the new relationship energy and then just wait, eventually, like, the new relationship energy will start to attenuate, and then the person will start integrating back into the polycule, that kind of stuff. And so it just kind of sounds like that's what he's talking about. I still think, though, that he's minimizing, or he's not really hearing what Mariah is saying, that everything he's saying can be true. And this is good for her to know. And I can't imagine that Mariah would assume this, that Kody's saying, look, I know the whole deal and I'm okay with it. We'll grow past this, essentially is what he's saying, which is, I think, is really commendable for him to say. And I think that is a relief, and it would resolve that loyalty issue for her. I mean, it could. But I still think that Mariah needs to be validated or heard, what happened there? What are you basing this on? Like, was this a daily thing? What were the sort of things that your mom was saying to you? What kind of position were you being? At least I would want to know from Mariah, because I think from Mariah's perspective, it's like, yeah, okay, it was infatuation, whatever word you want to put to it, but my mom was prepared to run away with this guy, and was, okay, you can call it infatuation, whatever it was, but she was all in, and that was before the intimidation and the threats happened. I think that's what Mariah is telling us.
Do you think she was going to leave me?
I think if that person was real, it was a very real possibility that she would have.
I'm in this place with Mariah where I'm trying to get her not to sway me. I mean, Nancy was worried about me polarizing Mariah on my side. I'm worried about Mariah polarizing me to her side. This isn't getting cool.
So it sounds like they went to therapy, and Nancy told Kody, don't polarize to your side. Okay.
What I'm trying to do here is get Mariah to have some empathy for her mother. And you're right at that.
And that's great, but people need to have empathy for Mariah. People need to listen to Mariah. I think Mary particularly needs to listen to Mariah.
That age where you start to realize how flawed we are as a as our offspring. You're not a child, but now mom and dad aren't really perfect. Mariah's anger is such that I think she'd have me push Mary out on her ear. And I need to have Mariah understand that that's not what's going to happen here.
Yeah, I was wondering if that's what the assumption was, or that's what would be assumed, but I don't know. I don't think that's necessarily true. I think Mariah is just frustrated because no one's listening to her. And I think she's like, until someone recognizes what I went through and what my mom did, I just don't feel like I want to let it go.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry that this happened. I'm not in any way doubting that I was somewhat a catalyst in making this happen with mom.
I don't think so.
Yeah, I was.
Yeah, I'm wondering, who knows, but I'm also wondering now if Mariah were to be completely forthcoming, she would say, look, even before the friend conversations were happening with a lot of people online, my mom has been seemingly doing maybe not infidelity things, but has not been straightforward with you. And I think this was just when everything blew up in the family that, of course I'm not hearing that, but it makes me wonder if she has a lot of reasons to believe historically that Mary isn't forthcoming, that she does hold back, which you could imagine. I mean, now that I'm hearing that Mary and Mariah were having lots of conversations and fights about the catfisher, because I wouldn't have assumed that. I would have thought that Mary would have enough sense not to drag Mariah into that, because it sounded like a very private thing that Mary was doing. But it would make sense given that for Mary, for a majority of her life, it was just the two of them. It was just Mariah and Mary, and Kody would be gone, right, with the other families. So it makes sense. It's unfortunate when this happens because you don't want to parentify or enmesh. And I don't know. It's just one data point, but it makes me wonder if Mariah, for a long time, has been parentified and has been the person that Mary will confide in, and Mariah has witnessed a lot of split loyalties, difficult loyalties, because Mary will complain about Kody or something, or maybe even the other sister wives, and Mariah has to hear that and suffer from that because she's like, well, okay, I love you, Mom, but I also love my family. So what do I don't know. I'm completely speculating, but this makes me wonder. All right. Well, that does it for that episode. Tune in next time when I continue watching. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.